Last week we made our pop-up room, so I hope that everybody was able to make one during the week and that you might all have an idea for a design. In my case, mine was trees and plants. Today we are going to discuss making some samples based on your sketch. Now your sketch is small, and the samples that we're going to make should be life-size sections of your design. So paint them at the actual size, draw them at the actual size. And in order to do this, the first thing that you need to do is decide where the light is coming from in your room. So I've cut a window in my design, so I'm deciding that the light is following sort of the direction of this pencil. But to make it a bit clearer, you remember we fixed our design together temporarily on the back, either with paper clips or in my case a bit of tape, so that you could remove the back walls for sketching on. So I've photocopied my walls here, and I've made a note of so there's my window. Oh, I do hope you can see that. So I've drawn the window on there, and I've decided that the light on my trees, you know, whatever you're drawing, we discussed it could be a little mouse down by the skirting board. It could be a drawing of a painting on the wall. But you need to have a light source that is consistent wherever you are in your room. So I've decided, I've made a window, the light is coming from the window, and I've stuck on these little blue arrows to remind me where the light is coming from. I've also put a little circle there. That's the area that I'm going to use to make my samples. So now that I know where the light is coming from, I've sketched onto my sketch. I've added some shadows along the side of my branches. Lift that up again just to see. If I hold it still, it might be a bit clearer. So I hope everyone can see that. So I've worked around it and worked out that the leaves will be a little bit darker where they're further away from the light source. And up at the top of my window, everything above the window is going to be getting the light from below. So that's something that you need to think about when you're doing your samples and you pick your area. Now, when I'm doing a design for a customer, I normally do the little pop-up that we've done, and then I do the samples that we're going to do. So this is just a very quick sketch. I have done a sort of one with a bit of little bit of shadow on, one with more shadow, and one very, very light one. And this is the sort of thing that I would show to my customer. And I would also take it into the actual room and hold my sample up against the wall so that we could decide whether it looked right in that room, in the light that's in that room. So if you're going to see something from very close to, you'll want a lot of detail. If it's going to be seen from far away, you'll need less detail and more contrast. So that's something you'll work out by doing your samples. So we'll get started now with our drawing techniques. So I hope everybody perhaps has got an outline drawing of something that they're going to work from. So if you have that outline drawing, you could pick that up now, put that on your tabletop now and have your visual reference. In my case, it's the flower. And we gathered together some materials for today. So I've got some torn pieces of paper, and I'm going to use those. You can see I've been trying them out for the edges of my petals. I've got some shapes that I've cut out from card. This is from the inside of kitchen roll. So I've cut out a leaf shape from there. So I've got the space where I've cut the leaf out, and I've got the leaf as well. I've done the same thing with paper. So I've got the positive and the negative of the paper. I've got some slightly thicker card as well, and I've cut some sharper edges here. You might find that useful. We'll get back to that in a minute. I've got a little piece of kitchen paper, a scrap of kitchen paper or a little scrap of fabric. You can see I've been using that to rub the pencil with already. And I've got a paper clip. And one other thing that we're going to need is a strip of copy paper, if you have it, and we're going to make a little smudging tool called a tortillion. So a tortillion you can buy in the shop, and it's a rolled up piece of, it's sort of like very thin card. This one's worn down a bit. They're sometimes a bit pointier than that. And this one is all grubby at the end because I've been using it already. But you're going to make your own one. So if you get a strip of paper, I suppose that's probably about 6 centimeters. And what we want to do is make a point at the end of it. So we want to make it look a bit like the one from the shop. So I'm folding the corner over there to get a nice point to begin with. I'm sort of squashing down. Is everybody able to do this? Don't feel you need to make it right now, but you could make a set of these. You could try using finer paper and thicker paper. You want it, I think anything much thinner than copy paper will be too bendy. So you roll it up so that you keep that point at the end. So it's sort of going to come up into a cone shape. Sorry, I'll just make this one rather quickly. It's a cone shape there, pointy at one end and wider at the other end. And then with a little bit of tape, you can put that round so that you're holding it together. So, and that's another smudging tool. So here's one that I made earlier. You can see I've already started to use it. The other thing we'll use is a piece of eraser. So I've just used the scissors and chopped a little piece off the end of this. So I've got a nice little point there. You can buy these pen erasers, but then you're stuck with having to keep buying the refills. They're quite useful because it's easier to see where you're erasing than if you're holding the little piece in your hand. Your fingers might get in the way of where you're doing the rubbing out, but we're going to work with the little cut off piece. Okay, so here I have made a note of my light source. It's really helpful to remember which direction the light is meant to be coming from so that you know where your shadows are going to be and where your highlights are going to be. So we'll start off doing some smudging technique, and we're going to use the torn paper. I think, oh, I've got my pencil, of course, I didn't mention that. I'm using an HB, but you could use any, you know, a darker pencil if you want, but an HB is useful. You can make all the marks you want with that. So there are two ways to use this torn paper as a mask. One way is to put it down on the outside of a shape and shade inside, but you can also use it to cover up a shape. So in this case, I'm putting it over the top of this light petal. I'm just putting it there. And then I can shade beyond that petal. And because the paper is quite thin, I'm not going backwards and forwards because it could pick the paper up and then the line would go underneath. I can erase it, but I don't really want that. So I'm just going in one direction. And you can vary the mark a bit, sort of lighter and darker. And then once I think I'm more or less happy with that, then I could just smudge that with my finger, because I'm going for a sort of drawing where we don't have too many lines. You want everything to be really blended. Or to get it even more blended, you can just rub it with a little bit of cloth or the kitchen paper so that it gets really smooth. And the torn paper edge just makes a really nice sort of ripply petal edge. And I'm not lining it up exactly with my petal. If you wanted, you could tear out each shape really carefully, but I've just got a few, I've guessed at a few general shapes that I'm using. And do the same thing on the edge of the petal, sort of making the shading coming in. So if I was doing, say, this little patch here, so I'm putting that there and shading in. And then I want to get rid of all of the little lines there, so I could blend it with my finger or again with the kitchen paper. If you want to tidy up the edge, then if you've gone over the edge or you haven't quite lined up with your drawn line of the petal, then you can just erase. And you can also use your eraser to make highlights. So again, I've got some little light marks. Perhaps it's easier to see some of these larger ones here. So I can erase those so that I can go back in and lift out areas of this shading to try to match up to what I'm looking at on my photograph. Now, using your finger and the fabric to do the smudging is fine, but if there's an area where you want to do some more detailed smudging and come right up to the edge, it's much easier to use the tortillon because it's more precise. So here, I want to make this little shape in there, and I'm going to put my I've got my little leaf that I made out of the card. I've drawn around it so that I know where it's going. So I'm going to put that on there, and then again, you know, I'm adding a bit more shadow in there, and I'm having a look at it. But let's say this patch, I want to just shade it a little bit more carefully. And with the tortillon, I can do that. I can be really, really precise. Once you've got a bit of pencil on the end of the tortillon, you might also find that you can draw with it. So you can add some little details, just putting the pencil back on with the tortillon as well. With our cutout shapes, again, two ways to use them. So in the same way as with our torn edge, we could put it to protect the outside, or we can put it over the edge of the petal and do the shading beyond the petal. With our cutout shapes, we've got two options. We can put them down and we can draw around them, do the shading around them. And this, because it's quite robust, this card, I can be quite firm, you know, and get a really dark shadow and be confident that it's not going to slip underneath the leaf when I'm doing that. So you're leaving a really sharp, clean shape. So that might be useful in certain circumstances. With my petal, everything's quite soft. There are lots of little shadows. But if you were going to draw something which had a lot of sharp, hard edges, you could even use a plastic ruler and then shade up to the edge of the ruler if you wanted a straight line. Remember that you can then go back and you can use the inside shape as well. And again, you can fill that up with shading. And then you can do your smudging. So here I've removed the outside shape. So it's quite a blurry mark. If I did the smudging with my paper shape in place, then I would be smudging up to the edge and I would have a sharper shape at the end of it. And remember that you can go over a number of times adding more detail. So for example, with one of the petals here, I've done a little bit of work there. Now I can add a bit more, add another sort of area of shadow. I won't blend it because I think it might show up a little bit better if I don't blend it. So you can keep altering and adding as you go along and keep smudging, and just keep referring back to your to your visual reference. Remember where your light source is coming from. Once your drawing starts to get, there's quite a lot going on. One thing you might want to do is get a clean piece of paper, and while you're working on one area, rest your hand on the paper, because otherwise what you might find is that you're gradually smudging as you're leaning on your drawing. So you try and remember, once you've built up quite a lot of pencil, because the pencil does smudge very easily, so put a clean piece of paper to rest your hand on. The last thing that we were going to do is incising. So I've got the paper clip, if you all have a paper clip, and we're going to score into the paper. I found this didn't work when I did it on a hard tabletop. So I'm putting a piece of card under the paper, and then I can press in. So I've decided I'm going to make some little veins on this leaf shape here. So I'm pressing in quite firmly with the paper clip. There we go. And then I'm going to get the pencil and go over the top. And I'm hoping that those lines, there we go, are going to stay light. So I'll just hold that up. Perhaps you can get a slightly better view of it. Does that show? So the incised lines are lighter. Obviously that's something that you can do on a drawing and not on the wall. This is the same drawings. I'd suggested that you make a few copies of an outline drawing. This is the same drawing, but this one I've been working on now for about 10 hours. So you can see it's not a quick process. There are lots of little variations there with the shading. I haven't used any of the incised lines on the leaves on this one. But there's quite a lot of detail there. There's still quite a bit, there's quite a way to go, I think. But at this point, there's enough detail there for me to take this and hold it up. I would decide where my mural was going to be seen from, where my Grisaille painting was going to be seen from. I would tape this to the wall and I would have a look at it. And then I could see whether I needed to add more contrast. I thought when I looked at this, it looked a little bit the tones were a little bit too even. It needed to be simplified a little bit. Now that's another version, an earlier version, which I think was used to on the website with the details of the Grisaille workshop. For my purposes, I think this one is better. It's simpler, it's lighter, there's a bit more contrast around the edges. So this week, the plan is for you to do 2 or 3 versions of a section of your design at the actual size. So perhaps next week, I don't know whether it'd be lovely if you could share the drawings with us. Try using all these different techniques. Think about the best combination of techniques to use for whatever it is you've chosen as the subject for your design. And then next week, we're going to look at drawing shadows. So here we've got a drawing of a flower and there's a shadow on the wall behind it. I don't know if I just keep that still, maybe that will show up. So we're going to look at how you can use a shadow to establish what time of day it is. Is it a sunny day? You might want to have a strong shadow, a lighter shadow. So we're going to look at all that in detail. And we're also going to look at drawing objects with different textures. So we'll look at sort of fuzzy things, tennis ball, shiny things, that's just a Christmas decoration with a pearl inside it, maybe sort of spiky things. So we'll look at drawing different textures, and we're going to look at the shadows that these different objects cast. and how to draw those. So for next week, it would be really helpful if you could have a 2p bit, if you could add a 2p bit. So we'll need the same kit as this week, and then we'll use the 2p bit to draw a series of circles, and then we're going to draw a different texture in each of these circles, and we're also going to think about the sort of shadow that would be cast perhaps late in the day, on a cloudy day, on a sunny day, and the best way to draw those using our kit of materials. Thank you so much for coming today, and I hope you enjoy making your sample drawings of your design. Thanks again.